The air at Oak Creek Women's Correctional Facility didn't just hang, it pressed down on you, a physical weight of Georgia humidity, pine needles, and desperation. It was a suffocating blanket woven from the drone of cicadas and the distant clang of steel on steel. Into this stagnant world of concrete and razor wire stepped Serafina Sarah Washington. She was not like the others. While most new arrivals carried their fear and despair openly, like poorly packed luggage, Sarah wore an unnerving stillness. At 28, she moved with the predatory grace of a panther, her tall, lean frame a study in controlled energy. Her eyes, the color of dark molasses, missed nothing. They swept over the guard towers, the drooping faces of the other inmates, the bored, contemptuous expressions of the white correctional officers, cataloging every weakness, every crack in the facade of order. Her transfer from a high-security facility in Atlanta was for disciplinary reasons, a vague term that hinted at a mind too sharp for its own good. The official charge was sophisticated financial fraud, but the real crime, the one that got her moved to this rural backwater, was her refusal to be broken. "Washington, this is your new home for the next 5 years," grunted Officer Miller, a man whose gut strained against the buttons of his uniform. His tone was dismissive, the kind reserved for stray dogs or things you scrape off your boot. "Your cellmate is Diaz. Don't start trouble, and maybe you'll finish your sentence in one piece." The cell was a cramped concrete box, a tomb for the living. The air was thick with the scent of bleach and stale sweat. On the bottom bunk, a young Latina woman with weary eyes looked up from a tattered paperback. "Isabella Diaz," she said, her voice soft but guarded. "Call me Izzy." "Serafina Washington?" Sarah replied, her voice a low, smooth contralto that seemed at odds with the harsh surroundings. She placed her meager belongings on the top bunk with methodical precision. There was a stark polarity between the two women. Izzy, a vessel of quiet resignation, her posture curved inward as if to protect herself from the world, and Sarah, a coiled spring of intent, her back ramrod straight, her presence filling the small space. Over the next few days, Sarah assimilated with chilling efficiency. She learned the prison's unspoken rules, the racial geography of the yard, where black, white, and Latina inmates kept to their own territories, a fragile truce policed by glares and occasional violence. She observed the guards, noting who was lazy, who was cruel, and who was corrupt. The deputy warden, a man named Calloway, was a brute who seemed to relish his power, his casual racism dripping from every command he barked at the black inmates. But Sarah's primary focus, her unwavering point of observation, was Warden Samuel Thorne. He was the king of this miserable kingdom, a man in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no. He walked the grounds with an air of detached authority, a plantation owner surveying his fields. He represented everything Sarah had come to despise, the unchecked power, the smug hypocrisy, the very architecture of a system designed to crush women who looked like her. Izzy, who had been at Oak Creek for 2 years for selling prescription pills after losing her nursing license, provided the initial intel. "Thorne likes to keep up appearances," she whispered one night, the thin walls seeming to listen. "He's strict, but they say he has a weakness, a taste for the exotic, something different from his perfect little church-going wife in town." Sarah absorbed this information without comment. Her mind was a chessboard, and she was already several moves ahead. She saw the lines of power, the vulnerabilities, the potential plays. The system had taken everything from her, her future, her body, her freedom. It had tried to erase her, label her as just another statistic, another angry black woman. But here, in the suffocating heat of a Georgia prison, she wasn't planning on just surviving. She was planning on balancing the scales. One afternoon, during yard time, she stood by the fence watching as Warden Thorne conducted a brief, formal inspection. He walked with a purpose that was both powerful and hollow. His world was one of control, of rules and regulations that he enforced, but likely believed himself to be above. He was the sun around which this bleak planet revolved. The other inmates either averted their eyes or watched him with a mixture of fear and resentment. But Sarah watched him with something else entirely, calculation. As he turned to leave, his gaze briefly swept across the yard and, for a fleeting second, met hers. He saw just another inmate in a drab uniform, but she saw a target. She saw the perfect instrument for her justice. And as he walked away, a slow, cold smile, almost imperceptible, touched Serafina Washington's lips. It was not a smile of happiness, but of terrible, unyielding purpose. The game had just begun. The summons came on a Tuesday morning. The air was already thick and humid, promising another brutal Georgia day. "Washington! Warden's office, now!" a guard yelled, the words echoing down the cell block. A ripple of whispers followed Sarah as she was escorted to the administrative wing. A meeting with the warden was never good news. It meant a transfer, solitary, or worse. But Sarah walked with an unruffled calm that unnerved her escort. Warden Thorne's office was a world away from the grime of the cell blocks. It was a sanctuary of polished mahogany, leather-bound books that looked untouched, and the faint, cloying scent of an air freshener, trying to mask the prison's ever-present odor of disinfectant. On his desk, a silver-framed photograph depicted a smiling, blonde woman and 2 teenage sons, a perfect portrait of Southern respectability. This was the polarized world Thorne inhabited, a life of curated perfection on one side of a steel door, and a kingdom of controlled squalor on the other. Thorne sat behind his imposing desk, studying her file. He gestured to the chair opposite him, without looking up. "Serafina Washington," he began, his voice a smooth baritone. "Impressive file, not the usual petty theft and drug charges we see from your community." The casual racism was subtle, delivered with the paternalistic air of a man who believed he was paying her a compliment. Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her posture regal. "I've been told I'm an overachiever, Warden." He finally looked up, and his gray eyes, which he probably thought were commanding, met her dark, unreadable ones. For a moment, he seemed taken aback by her directness, by the absence of fear or deference. "It says here you have 2 years of college credits. Business administration, a real shame. You could have been something. One of the smart ones gone wrong." "Life presents limited choices, sir," Sarah replied, her voice even, "especially when the game is rigged from the start." A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, or intrigue, crossed Thorne's face. He was used to broken women, not this defiant, articulate creature who met his gaze as an equal. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I run a tight ship, Washington. I don't tolerate the kind of manipulative behavior your file suggests you're fond of. Here, you follow the rules, or you find yourself in the shoes so long you forget what the sun feels like." The threat was plain, a stark contrast to the civilized decor of his office. "My only desire is to serve my time peacefully, Warden," Sarah said, allowing a hint of what could be mistaken for compliance to soften her voice. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze lingering. It was the look of a collector appraising a new, unusual piece. He was bored with his life, with his perfect wife and his predictable job. Sarah could see it in the slight slump of his shoulders, the dullness in his eyes that only lit up when confronted with a challenge. And she was a challenge. "Your file also says you worked as a clerk in your college library," he said, changing tactics. "The position in our library is open. It's a privilege, quiet, air-conditioned, away from the general population." He let the offer hang in the air, a carrot dangled before her. It was a test, a way for him to exert control, to grant a favor and create a debt. "I would be grateful for the opportunity," Sarah said, playing her part perfectly. "I enjoy order, and books." "Good," Thorne nodded, making a note in her file. He was pleased. He had asserted his dominance, shown his magnanimity. He believed he had won their silent confrontation. He was the powerful warden. She was the grateful inmate. But as Sarah watched him, she saw the truth. He was a fly, blissfully unaware of the web being spun around him. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "You'll start on Monday. In the meantime, there's a formality." He paused, his expression unreadable. "Before you start any privileged work detail, especially one with access to administrative areas, you have to undergo a full comprehensive medical examination with Dr. Cole. It's mandatory, no exceptions." Sarah's calm expression didn't waver, but inside, a switch was flipped. This wasn't a setback. It was an opening. the perfect unforeseen variable that would accelerate her entire plan. The system, in its arrogant bureaucratic blindness, was about to hand her the very weapon she needed. "I understand, Warden," she said. And in her eyes, if he had cared to look closely, he would have seen not gratitude, but the triumphant glint of a predator whose prey had just wandered directly into its trap. The infirmary smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. It was a place of last resort, where illnesses were managed, not cured, and pain was dulled, not healed. Dr. Marcus Cole was an anomaly in Oak Creek. An older black man with kind, tired eyes and a gentle demeanor, he seemed to carry the weight of the entire facility on his stooped shoulders. He treated his patients, inmates the rest of the world had discarded, with a dignity they rarely received elsewhere. He was a good man trapped in a broken system. "Miss Washington, please have a seat," he said, his voice a welcome balm after the abrasive tones of the guards. He reviewed the medical file transferred from her previous facility, his brow furrowing slightly. The silence in the small examination room stretched on, thick with unspoken questions. Sarah sat on the examination table, a paper sheet crinkling beneath her. She waited. She knew what he was reading. She had been waiting for this moment. Dr. Cole finally looked up, his expression a mixture of professional concern and profound sadness. "The file states you're on antiretroviral therapy," he said softly. "You've been HIV positive for 5 years." It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation of a shared, grim reality. In this place, such a diagnosis was more than a medical condition. It was a scarlet letter, a weapon that could be used against you. "Yes, doctor," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I am fully compliant with my treatment. Your viral load is undetectable, according to these records." "That's very good," he said, trying to offer a sliver of clinical positivity. "It means the medication is working. It also means the risk of transmission is significantly reduced, but—" He trailed off, looking at her with an intensity that went beyond a doctor-patient relationship. It was the look of an elder seeing a young woman from his own community walking a dangerous path. "You must be careful in here, Serafina. People can be cruel. Your privacy will be protected by this office, but you must protect yourself." "I always do, doctor," Sarah said. The assurance was layered with a double meaning he couldn't possibly grasp. Back in her cell that night, the oppressive heat seemed to amplify the silence. Izzy was reading, but her focus was elsewhere. She had seen the look on Sarah's face when she returned from the infirmary, a look of chilling, resolute finality. "What did the doctor want?" Izzy asked, putting her book down. Sarah sat on her bunk, the shadows cast by the single-barred window striping her face. The world outside was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm she was about to unleash. "He confirmed what I already knew," she said. Then she looked directly at Izzy, her eyes boring into her. "And now it's time you know everything." She began to speak, her voice low and devoid of emotion, as if she were reciting a legal brief. She told Izzy about Frank Miller, the decorated Atlanta PD deputy who had offered her a ride home from her waitressing job 5 years ago. She detailed the assault on a deserted road, the casual brutality, the way he had smirked and called her a liar when she threatened to report him. She described how he had used his badge and his connections to crush her, turning her accusation into a case of a disgruntled girl trying to shake down a hero cop. And then she told her about the diagnosis 3 months later. The HIV was his parting gift, a life sentence delivered with a sneer. "I tried to get justice the right way," Sarah said, a flicker of the old fiery rage finally breaking through her composure. "The system is designed to protect men like him and discard women like me. So I found another way. My fraud cases, every victim was a corrupt official, a crooked cop, a powerful man who thought he was untouchable. I destroyed their careers, their reputations. It was the only justice I could get." Izzy stared at her, horrified and fascinated. "But what does that have to do with Thorne?" Sarah's expression turned to ice. "Thorne is the embodiment of that system. He's Miller, just in a different uniform. He sits in his clean office with his perfect family photo and holds the power of life and death over hundreds of women, many of whom are victims just like me. He's arrogant, he's bored, and as you said, he has a weakness." The air in the cell grew cold. Izzy felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. "Sarah, what are you going to do?" I'm going to give him the same gift Miller gave me, Sarah said, the words falling like chips of stone. I'm going to get close to him. I'm going to make him want me, trust me, and then I'm going to infect him. Izzy recoiled as if struck. My God, Sarah, that's a crime. They'll add years, a lifetime. They have to catch me first, Sarah said, and then she delivered the final, most terrifying piece of her plan. And they won't, because I don't intend to survive this. When he finds out what I've done, he'll kill me. He'll have to. A man like that can't let a secret like this live. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a devil's bargain offered in the suffocating darkness of a prison cell. His rage will make him sloppy. He'll murder me, and he'll try to cover it up. But he won't know that I've been documenting everything, every meeting, every conversation, evidence that will not only destroy him, but will also lead back to Frank Miller in Atlanta. But that evidence is useless if it stays buried with me. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. I need you, Izzy. When I'm gone, I need you to be my voice. I need you to get the evidence to the right people. My death won't be an end. It will be the trigger, the beginning of his end. Will you help me? The Oak Creek Library was a pocket of silence in a universe of noise. It was the only place in the facility that was consistently cool, the hum of the old air conditioning unit, a soothing mantra against the oppressive Georgia heat. For most inmates, it was a refuge. For Sarah, it was a hunting ground. She transformed the space with an almost obsessive efficiency. She reorganized the chaotic shelves, created a proper card catalog system, and repaired torn book covers with a surgeon's precision. Her professionalism was a stark, jarring contrast to the lethargy that permeated the rest of the prison. She was a woman of purpose in a place designed to strip it away. And just as she predicted, the warden noticed. Samuel Thorne's visits started as brief, official check-ins. Excellent work, Washington, he'd say, his eyes sweeping over the newly ordered shelves. But soon, the official nature of his visits began to fray at the edges. He started lingering, pulling a random book from a shelf and using it as a pretext to talk. You read philosophy? He asked one afternoon, holding a worn copy of Plato's Republic. I believe in knowing your enemy, Sarah replied, not looking up from her work. Plato had some interesting ideas about control and the ideal state. Her intelligence intrigued him. It was a novelty. His wife, he'd subtly complain, was more concerned with garden clubs and church bake sales. His conversations with Sarah became a forbidden thrill, an intellectual affair that danced on the edge of impropriety. He saw himself not as a warden talking to a prisoner, but as a sophisticated man engaging with a brilliant, misunderstood woman. He was blind to the fact that every word he spoke, every personal frustration he revealed about his stagnant marriage and unfulfilling career, was a thread she was carefully weaving into her web. The library became their private world. The rows of books acted as barriers, shielding them from the prying eyes of the single guard posted at the door. Here, the power dynamic seemed to invert. In his office, he was the warden. Here, in her domain of quiet and order, he was just a man, vulnerable and seeking validation. Dr. Cole saw what was happening. During Sarah's monthly checkups, his questions became more pointed. The library detail seems to agree with you, he'd say, his kind eyes clouded with worry. The warden has taken a special interest in your work. He appreciates efficiency, doctor, Sarah would reply, her voice smooth as glass. Be careful, Serafina, he warned one day, dropping the professional pretense. Men like Thorne, they collect things, trophies. Don't let yourself become one. He knew he couldn't say more without breaching confidentiality, but his warning was clear. He saw a lamb wandering toward a lion. He had no idea he was witnessing a spider luring a fly. The tension between Sarah and Thorne escalated. A casual brush of hands as they reached for the same book. A shared glance that lasted a moment too long. The air between them grew thick with a dangerous, unspoken energy. Thorne was a man starved for attention, and Sarah fed him a carefully curated diet of it. She listened with an intensity that made him feel like the most important man in the world. She challenged his opinions just enough to make him feel intellectually stimulated. She was a mirror reflecting back the version of himself he desperately wanted to be, powerful, intelligent, and desired. One evening, just before lockdown, he came to the library. The final bell had rung, and the last of the inmate helpers had shuffled out. The guard at the door was new and easily intimidated. I need to check the inventory logs, Thorne said, his voice a little too loud. Give us a few minutes. The guard nodded and stepped outside, leaving them alone. The silence that descended was heavy and charged. The hum of the AC unit was the only sound. The world outside, the world of bells and shouting and steel doors, faded away. It was just the two of them, surrounded by the silent stories of 1,000 books. You're doing remarkable work here, Sarah, he said, using her first name for the first time. The word felt like a transgression, a line being crossed. I like putting things in their proper place, Samuel, she replied, her voice a low murmur. She too had crossed a line. He moved closer, his cologne, a generic masculine scent, cutting through the smell of old paper. He was a man fighting a battle with himself and losing. His respectable life, his family photo, his position of power, it all meant nothing compared to the intoxicating pull of this forbidden moment. He saw a beautiful, intelligent inmate. He didn't see the years of methodical, simmering rage behind her eyes. He didn't see the ghost of Deputy Frank Miller standing right beside her. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a second, before his fingers gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. Her skin was warm. She didn't pull away. She simply watched him, her expression a perfect mask of vulnerability. That was all the encouragement he needed. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was clumsy, desperate, the kiss of a drowning man. Sarah remained passive for a moment before responding with just enough warmth to seal his fate. As he kissed her, lost in his reckless conquest, her eyes were wide open, staring at the rows of neatly organized books, each one a silent witness, each one a tombstone for the man he used to be. The web was complete. The prey was caught. The kiss in the library broke the dam. What had been a slow, simmering tension erupted into a reckless, clandestine affair. Thorne, consumed by an obsession he mistook for passion, began creating excuses to summon Sarah to his office late in the evening, after most of the administrative staff had gone home. The polished mahogany desk, once a symbol of his authority, became the stage for their illicit encounters. He was a man possessed, shedding his skin of respectable warden to indulge in a fantasy he believed he controlled. He would lock the door, the click of the bolt, echoing the final closing of a door on his old life. In these stolen moments, he wasn't a husband or a father. He was a conqueror, taking what he wanted from a woman he saw as his possession. The polarity was dizzying. The powerful warden, reduced to a fumbling, needy lover by the very inmate he was supposed to control. Sarah played her role with chilling perfection. She was a vessel for his desires, her body a weapon, her feigned passion a poison she administered in the careful doses. With every touch, every secret meeting, she felt not a flicker of pleasure, only a cold, methodical sense of purpose. She was erasing him, dismantling him piece by piece, and he was a willing participant in his own destruction. He thought he was defiling her, a prisoner. In reality, she was hollowing him out from the inside. Dr. Cole's anxiety grew with each passing week. He saw the subtle changes in Sarah during her checkups, a new, dangerous confidence in her eyes. He saw the way Thorne would track her movements when he thought no one was watching. The good doctor was trapped in an ethical nightmare. He made one last, desperate attempt. During her next appointment, after the nurse had left, he closed the door and faced her, his expression grim. "Serafina, we need to talk, not as doctor and patient, but as two people who understand what this place can do to you." Sarah met his gaze, her face an unreadable mask. "I know what's happening with you and the warden," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't care about the morality of it, but I care about your health and his. You know the law. What you are doing could be considered assault with a deadly weapon. Intentional transmission of HIV is a felony that carries a sentence that will ensure you die in a place like this." His words were meant to be a shock, a dose of harsh reality to pull her back from the brink. But Sarah's expression didn't change. "Are you accusing me of something, doctor?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. "I'm trying to save you from yourself," he insisted, his desperation palpable. "Whatever you think you're gaining from this, it's not worth your life." "You assume I value my life in the same way you do," she replied, the coldness in her voice making him flinch. "You have no proof of anything, doctor, only suspicions. And you are bound by patient confidentiality. If you so much as hint to him about my status, you will be violating medical ethics and the law. I will report you. You will lose your license, your ability to help anyone. Is his life worth more than your career? It was a perfectly executed checkmate. She had cornered him, using the very rules of the system he abided by as the bars of his cage. He stared at her, seeing for the first time not a victim to be saved, but a force of nature he was powerless to stop. He saw the depth of her rage, the terrifying clarity of her mission. "Why?" he whispered, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Why are you doing this?" A flicker of something raw and painful crossed her face before the mask slammed back into place. "Because some debts can only be paid in full," she said. That night, she was in Thorne's office again. The air was stale with the scent of their last encounter. He was more reckless than ever, emboldened by the belief that their secret was safe. As he touched her, she felt a profound sense of finality. It was done. The virus, a silent, invisible assassin, had been passed. The biological part of her plan was complete. The time bomb was set and ticking inside his body. He pulled her closer, whispering things about how special she was, how she understood him in a way no one else did. He was a fool, intoxicated by his own fantasy. Sarah closed her eyes and allowed him to hold her body pliant in his arms. But her mind was 1,000 miles away, cold and clear as ice. It's over, she thought, not with triumph, but with the chilling, hollow finality of a death sentence delivered. He just doesn't know it yet. The trap had been set and sprung. All that remained was to reveal the steel jaws to their victim. Sarah chose her moment with the precision of a demolitions expert, planting a final charge. It was a week later, late on a Friday night in Thorne's office. A storm raged outside, the thunder rattling the windows, providing a dramatic soundtrack for the destruction she was about to unleash. They had just made love on the leather couch against the wall, a frantic, desperate act that Thorne believed was a testament to their passion. He lay back, spent and smiling, the very picture of a self-satisfied man. This was the moment of his peak arrogance, and therefore his peak vulnerability. Sarah sat up, pulling the thin blanket around her shoulders. She looked not at him, but at the family photograph on his desk. The smiling faces of his wife and sons seemed to mock him from across the room. "Samuel," she began, her voice soft, almost conversational, "I never told you the real story of why I'm here." "You said it was fraud," he murmured, reaching for her. "Something about angry rich men." "That's the charge," she said, pulling away slightly. She turned to face him, her eyes catching the dim light from his desk lamp. "But the reason is revenge. I was getting back at the man who ruined my life." He sat up, sensing the shift in her tone. The post-coital languor evaporated, replaced by a nod of unease. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" She told him the story again, but this time she filled in the blanks. She named Deputy Frank Miller. She described the assault in excruciating detail, her voice remaining eerily calm, a dispassionate narrator of her own horror story. Thorne listened, his expression turning from confusion to discomfort. He thought this was some plea for sympathy, a sob story to deepen their intimacy. "That's horrible," he said, reaching for her hand. "The man's a monster." "He is," Sarah agreed. "But he didn't just take my dignity that night. He left me with a souvenir." She paused, letting the weight of the silence fill the room. The only sound was the drumming of rain against the glass. "The worst part wasn't the assault, Samuel. It was the diagnosis I got 3 months later. He infected me with HIV." The color drained from Thorne's face. He snatched his hand back as if he'd touched a hot stove. The air crackled. The name of the disease hung between them, a tangible, terrifying thing. "What?" he stammered, his mind refusing to connect the dots. "I have HIV, Samuel," she said, her voice like a shard of ice. "I've had it for 5 years. Dr. Cole can confirm it. It's right there in my medical file, the one you skimmed but never bothered to read thoroughly." He scrambled off the couch, yanking on his trousers with fumbling, panicked movements. "No, you're lying. This is a sick joke." "Is it?" Sarah remained seated, a portrait of unnerving calm. "Go ahead, pull my file, or better yet, go get tested. Though I'm afraid it's a little late for that now, isn't it? We've never used protection, not once." The reality crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. His perfect life, his family, his career, his health. He saw it all shattering like glass. His face contorted into a mask of pure horror, which quickly curdled into incandescent rage. "You bitch!" he hissed, his voice trembling. "You did this on purpose." Sarah finally stood up, wrapping the blanket around herself like a royal robe. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw not the seductive inmate, but the executioner. Her eyes were devoid of pity. "Yes," she said, the single word landing like a gunshot. "I did. On purpose. Now you know what it feels like, to have your future stolen in a single moment by someone more powerful than you. To have your body turned into a prison. Welcome to my world." A guttural roar of fury erupted from his throat. He lunged at her, his hands clamping around her neck, slamming her back against the wall of books. "I'll kill you!" he screamed, his face inches from hers, spittle flying from his lips. Sarah didn't struggle. She didn't even flinch. Her eyes, wide and clear, held his. She choked out the words she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. "Go ahead, kill me." A wheezing sound escaped her lips. "But I've been documenting everything. Letters, tapes, details of our meetings that only you and I would know. It's all in a package. If I die, or even just disappear, that package gets sent to the press, to the State Board of Corrections, and to your wife." His grip faltered. The image of the headlines, the scandal, the ruin, flashed before his eyes. "Imagine it, Samuel," she gasped, her voice raspy. "Warden Thorne contracts HIV from inmate lover, abused his power, his perfect life, a lie. You won't just be a murderer. You'll be a pathetic joke." He released her, stumbling backward as if she had burned him. She crumpled to the floor, gasping for air, rubbing the red marks on her throat. He stared at her, his chest heaving, trapped between the urge to kill her and the terrifying realization that she had outmaneuvered him completely. He was in her prison now, and the walls were closing in. He was ruined, and the worst part was, he couldn't even have the satisfaction of destroying the person who did it to him. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Warden Thorne vanished for 4 days, calling in sick with a vague family emergency. Sarah knew exactly where he was, at some anonymous clinic, waiting in a cold sweat for the test results that would confirm his life was over. The prison hummed with rumors, but only Sarah, Izzy, and Dr. Cole knew the real reason for the warden's absence. The tension in Oak Creek was a living thing, a coiled snake waiting to strike. When Thorne returned, he was a ghost. The confident, authoritative man was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell. Dark circles pooled beneath his eyes. His skin had a grayish pallor, and a fine tremor ran through his hands. He avoided eye contact with everyone, especially Sarah. When their paths did cross in a hallway, he would flinch and hurry past, a powerful man reduced to a scared, haunted animal. He was a walking dead man, and Sarah was his reaper. She used the time to finalize her plans. During her shift in the library when no one was watching, she slipped a thick manila envelope into a hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick. It was all there, a detailed diary of their affair, transcripts of secretly recorded conversations made with a tiny device she'd acquired through the prison's black market, and a letter explaining her motive, her history with Frank Miller, and her deliberate infection of Thorne. It was her manifesto, her confession, and her final will and testament. That night, she told Izzy where to find it. "The whale," she whispered in their cell. "When it happens, you know what to do. The address is on the envelope. Don't mail it from here. Get someone on the outside to do it." "Sarah, this is insane," Izzy pleaded, her eyes wide with fear. "He looks like he's about to snap. You need to tell someone. Get into protective custody." "Protective custody is just a slower death, Izzy," Sarah replied calmly. "This has to play out. It's the only way." Her resolve was absolute, a terrifying, unshakable force. She was a soldier on a suicide mission, and she would not be deterred. Dr. Cole made one last plea. He called her to the infirmary under the pretext of a follow-up. "He came to see me, Serafina," he said, his voice heavy with dread. "He didn't say anything, but I saw it in his eyes. He knows. He's positive. You are in mortal danger. Let me help you. I can arrange a transfer to a medical facility upstate. I can say your condition requires specialized treatment. I can get you out of here. It was an extraordinary offer, a good man risking his career to save a life. For a fleeting moment, Sarah's cold facade cracked. She saw the genuine care in his eyes, a kindness she hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you, doctor," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "But it's too late to run. The pieces are already in place. All we can do now is watch them fall." She walked out of the infirmary, leaving Dr. Cole standing alone, a man of healing utterly powerless to stop the impending tragedy. The end came that night. The final bell for lockdown had just sounded, its clang echoing through the cell block. The inmates were settling in, the nightly cacophony of shouts and arguments beginning to die down. Sarah was lying on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, when a young, nervous-looking guard appeared at her cell door. It wasn't one of the usual veterans. This one was fresh, his face pale and sweaty under the harsh fluorescent lights. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. "Washington," he stammered, avoiding her eyes. "The warden wants to see you, in his office, now." Izzy shot up from her bunk. "Now? It's after lockdown. He can't do that." "Warden's orders," the guard snapped, his fear making him aggressive. He unlocked the door and jerked his head at Sarah. "Let's go." Sarah rose from her bunk with a slow, deliberate grace. She didn't look scared. She looked ready. She turned and gave Izzy one last, quick look. It wasn't a look of fear or farewell. It was a command. Remember the plan. See it through. "It's all right, Izzy," she said, her voice calm. As the guard led her out of the cell block, Izzy watched them go, her heart pounding against her ribs. She knew, they both knew. Sarah wasn't going to the warden's office. She was walking to her own execution. The young guard didn't lead Sarah toward the administrative wing. He took a sharp turn down a dimly lit service corridor, a concrete artery of the prison that smelled of damp and rust. The air grew colder, the familiar sounds of the main facility fading behind them into a dull hum. This was off the books. This was a place where things could disappear. Sarah walked without resistance, her senses on high alert. She noted the lack of surveillance cameras, the heavy sound-dampening steel doors they passed. Her mind, even now, was a cold, analytical machine. She was gathering the last pieces of data, observing the details of her own murder. They stopped at a heavy door at the far end of the corridor, leading to a rarely used storage warehouse. The guard fumbled with the key, his breath coming in ragged bursts. He was terrified, a pawn in a game far beyond his understanding. He wrenched the door open and shoved Sarah inside, quickly pulling it shut behind her, the sound of his retreating footsteps echoing his cowardice. The warehouse was a cavernous space filled with the ghosts of prison equipment, rusted bed frames, stacks of old mattresses leaking their stuffing, broken down laundry machines. A single bare bulb hanging from the high ceiling cast long, grotesque shadows, turning the discarded junk into monstrous shapes. It was a boneyard, a fitting place for what was about to happen. Two figures emerged from the shadows, Warden Samuel Thorne and his deputy Calloway. If Thorne was a ghost, Calloway was a bulldog straining at the leash. A thick-set man with a florid face and cruel, piggy eyes, Calloway was known for his brutality and his overt, venomous racism. He looked at Sarah with pure hatred. Thorne, however, looked broken. His suit was rumpled, his face unshaven. The mask of authority was completely gone, leaving only a raw wound of despair and rage. "Hello, Samuel," Sarah said, her voice calm, almost conversational. "This is a bit dramatic, even for you." "Shut your mouth, you filthy," Calloway started, taking a step forward, but Thorne raised a hand, stopping him. "No, let her talk," Thorne said, his voice a hoarse croak. "I want to hear it one last time." "You want to hear what?" Sarah asked, a faint, ironic smile playing on her lips. "How you let a black woman from the wrong side of the tracks, an inmate you were supposed to control, dismantle your entire life. Is that what you want to hear? Where is it?" Thorne's voice trembled. "The evidence, the package you talked about. Tell me where it is and I'll make this quick." "It's in a place you'll never find," Sarah replied. "And the moment my heart stops beating, a timer starts. A friend of mine has instructions. If she doesn't hear from me, the package goes out. Killing me is the trigger, Samuel. You should know that by now. I planned for this. This was always the ending. "She's bluffing, boss," Calloway growled, pulling a thick length of rope from behind a stack of boxes. "Let's just finish this." Thorne ignored him, his wild eyes fixed on Sarah. "You ruined me," he whispered, the words filled with a self-pity that was almost pathetic. "My wife left, took the boys, my career, my life. It's all over." "Good," Sarah said, and the single word was colder than any winter wind. "Now, you have a small taste of what you and your kind do to people every single day. Now, you know what it feels like to have nothing left." She looked past him, as if speaking to someone else in the room. "And soon, Deputy Frank Miller in Atlanta will know it too. My evidence package isn't just about you, Samuel. It's about him too. It's a 2-for-1 deal." The mention of another name seemed to break something inside Thorne. The last vestige of the rational man he once was crumbled into dust. He gave a sharp, jerky nod to his deputy. "Hold her," Calloway grunted. Thorne lunged, grabbing Sarah's arms. She didn't fight back. There was no point. This was the final move in her chess game. Her own sacrifice was the checkmate. As Calloway approached, wrapping the coarse, scratchy rope around her neck, she locked eyes with Thorne one last time. There was no fear in her gaze, only a terrible, triumphant fire. "This isn't the end, Samuel," she rasped as the rope tightened, stealing her breath. "This is only the beginning." The next morning, the official story was clean and simple. Inmate Serafina Washington, despondent over her HIV diagnosis, had taken her own life. She was found in her cell, hanging from a bedsheet tied to the window bars. It was a tragedy, the prison administration announced, but not an uncommon one in such a high-stress environment. Case closed. 2 days after Sarah's suicide, a padded envelope with no return address landed on the desk of Detective Kira Riley of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Riley was a 30-year veteran of the force, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a reputation for being a bloodhound. Once she caught a scent of injustice, she never let go. The package, addressed to her by name, was an anomaly. Cops don't get anonymous fan mail. Inside, she found a thick sheaf of papers and a small USB drive. As she began to read, her eyebrows shot up. It was a diary, handwritten in a neat, precise script, detailing an illicit affair between an inmate named Serafina Washington and Warden Samuel Thorne of the Oak Creek Correctional Facility. There were transcripts of conversations, explicit photographs that looked like they were taken with a hidden camera in an office, and a final, chilling letter. The letter was a confession, a manifesto, and a dead woman's testimony. It laid out Sarah's entire story: the assault by Deputy Frank Miller, the deliberate infection of Thorne, and her prediction of her own murder, which she knew would be disguised as a suicide. The last line read, "By the time you read this, I will be dead. My name is Serafina Washington. Don't let them get away with it." "What in the hell?" Riley muttered, leaning back in her chair. This was either the ravings of a disturbed mind or the most explosive case of her career. Her first call was to the Oak Creek facility. She was met with a wall of bureaucratic resistance. Warden Thorne, she was told, was on an indefinite leave of absence for personal reasons. Deputy Warden Calloway, now acting warden, was dismissive. It was a clear-cut suicide, detective, Calloway said over the phone, his voice dripping with condescension. The inmate was HIV positive, depressed. The coroner signed off on it. "We've already closed our internal review. It's a tragedy, but it's over." The official report confirmed his story. The county coroner, a man Riley knew to be lazy and overworked, had ruled it a suicide by hanging, barely glancing at the body. The system was closing ranks, sweeping Sarah's death under the rug. But the contents of the package burned on Riley's desk. It was too detailed, too specific, to be a complete fabrication. Riley drove the 2 hours to Oak Creek, the Georgia pines flashing past her window. She invoked her GBI authority to conduct an unscheduled interview with Sarah's cellmate, Isabella Diaz. They sat in a sterile, windowless interrogation room. Izzy was a ghost, her eyes vacant, her responses monosyllabic. She was terrified. She parroted the official story. Sarah was depressed. She talked about ending it. She was quiet the night it happened. Riley listened patiently. Then she slid a single photograph across the table. It was one of the pictures from the envelope, A grainy shot of Thorne and Sarah in an embrace in what was clearly the warden's office. Izzy's composure shattered. A strangled sob escaped her lips. Her eyes, which had been dull with fear, now lit up with a mixture of grief and recognition. "You have it," she whispered. "She got it to you." "I have it," Riley confirmed, her voice gentle but firm. "Now, I need you to tell me everything, Izzy. I need you to be Sarah's voice. It's what she wanted." The dam broke. The words poured out of Izzy in a torrent of fear, guilt, and loyalty. She told Riley everything. The plan, the affair, Sarah's cold-blooded determination, her instructions about the package hidden in the library book. She described the nervous young guard who had taken Sarah on her final walk. "She knew he was going to kill her," Izzy wept, her body shaking. "She walked right into it. She said it was the only way to make them pay, to make everyone see." Riley listened, her own sense of cold fury growing with every word. Serafina Washington had been brilliant, calculating, and morally gray, but she had not been suicidal. She had been murdered, and she had orchestrated her own investigation from beyond the grave. The suicide ruling was a lie. The case wasn't closed. It was just beginning. Armed with Izzy's explosive testimony, Detective Riley went to the district attorney. The DA, a cautious man with political aspirations, was hesitant to challenge a warden and the entire state corrections department based on the word of a convicted felon. But the diary, the photos, and the chillingly prescient letter were undeniable. Riley got her warrant. The exhumation of Serafina Washington's body was a grim affair, conducted under a slate-gray sky that threatened rain. The new medical examiner, a meticulous professional handpicked by Riley, went to work. His findings were a bombshell. "The ligature marks on her neck are inconsistent with a hanging," he told Riley, pointing to photographs. "In a hanging, the mark is typically high on the neck, angled upward. These are horizontal. She was strangled, detective, likely from behind." He also found deep bruising on her wrists and defensive wounds on her forearms. Serafina Washington had fought for her life, however briefly. The suicide was a fabrication. This was homicide. With the ME's report, the case broke wide open. Deputy Warden Calloway was arrested and brought in for questioning. Confronted with the new autopsy results and Izzy's testimony, the brutish guard's bravado crumbled. After a grueling 8-hour interrogation, he confessed. He described the scene in the warehouse in lurid detail, implicating Thorne as the mastermind. He admitted to strangling Sarah on Thorne's order and helping him stage the suicide in her cell afterward. The motive? Thorne was in a panic, terrified that Sarah would expose their affair and his HIV status. "What about the murder weapon? The rope?" Riley pressed. "Thorne took it," Calloway said, his voice now a defeated mumble. "He said he'd get rid of it. The morning after, before anyone was on duty, he drove out to the old access road behind the prison, said he ditched it somewhere in the woods out there. An arrest warrant was issued for Samuel Thorne, but he was gone. He had cleared out his house and vanished the day after Riley's first visit to the prison. He was a man on the run. Finding the rope was now critical. It would be the physical evidence that corroborated Calloway's confession and tied Thorne directly to the murder. Riley organized a massive search of the wooded area Calloway had described, a sprawling, overgrown patch of dense Georgia forest. For 2 days, teams of officers combed the area, their progress slow and frustrating. The terrain was a nightmare of thick underbrush, poison ivy, and swampy patches. They found nothing. Hope was beginning to fade. On the 3rd day, Riley made a call. "Get me a K9 unit," she ordered. "The best one you've got." They brought in a German shepherd named Zeus, a veteran cadaver, an evidence dog with a legendary nose. His handler, a state trooper named Harris, led him into the search grid. For hours, Zeus worked, his nose to the ground, casting back and forth through the dense woods. The air was heavy and still, the only sound the rustling of leaves and the panting of the dog. Just as the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows through the forest, Zeus's behavior changed. He stopped, his head cocked, his tail rigid. A low whine escaped his throat. Then he let out a sharp, excited bark and began digging frantically at the base of a large, moss-covered oak tree, sending clumps of dark, damp earth flying. Harris and Riley rushed to the spot. "He's got something," Harris said, his voice tense. They carefully cleared away the dirt where Zeus was digging. About a foot down, their fingers hit something soft and pliable. It was a soiled canvas bag. Riley, wearing gloves, gently lifted it from the ground. It was heavier than it should have been. With a sense of grim anticipation, she opened the drawstring top. Coiled inside, like a sleeping viper, was a thick length of rope, the murder weapon. The final piece of Serafina Washington's puzzle had been found. The discovery of the rope galvanized the investigation. With a nationwide manhunt underway, it took 3 weeks to find Samuel Thorne. He was located in a cheap motel on the outskirts of El Paso, Texas, gaunt and disheveled, a shadow of the powerful man he had once been. He didn't resist arrest. His only words to the federal marshals who kicked in his door were a whispered, defeated admission. "She won. The bitch won." The trial of Thorne and Calloway became a national media sensation. It was a lurid, compelling story of sex, power, and revenge set against the grim backdrop of the prison system. Izzy Diaz, granted immunity, was the star witness. Her testimony, combined with Sarah's diary and the physical evidence of the rope, painted an undeniable picture of a cold-blooded murder and cover-up. The defense tried to portray Sarah as a vindictive, mentally unstable liar, but her meticulous documentation from beyond the grave proved more powerful than their rhetoric. Samuel Thorne was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Calloway, for his role, received 25 years. But Sarah's plan had a longer reach. The information in her evidence package about Deputy Frank Miller sparked a new internal investigation in the Atlanta Police Department. Armed with Sarah's detailed account, detectives re-interviewed other women who had filed complaints against Miller over the years. A pattern of abuse emerged, and several more victims, emboldened by Sarah's story, came forward. Frank Miller was arrested and faced a barrage of charges, his career as a hero cop ending in disgrace. The fallout from the case was immense. Serafina Washington's story forced a harsh spotlight on the systemic abuses within women's correctional facilities. State-level inquiries were launched, leading to new protocols to protect inmates from sexual misconduct by staff and stronger whistleblower protections. Dr. Cole resigned from Oak Creek, later dedicating his life to running a free clinic for HIV-positive patients in a low-income Atlanta neighborhood. Izzy Diaz served a reduced sentence for her cooperation and, upon her release, disappeared from the public eye, seeking the quiet life Sarah could never have. Detective Kira Riley received a commendation for solving the case, but it left an indelible mark on her. She often found herself thinking about the woman who had burned her own life down to expose the darkness. One cool autumn afternoon, Riley stood before a simple, unmarked grave in a small cemetery designated for the state's unclaimed dead. An anonymous donation, from Dr. Cole, she suspected, had paid for a proper burial. She placed a single white rose on the plot of earth that held the remains of Serafina Washington. Standing there, Riley was struck by the story's brutal and uncomfortable truth. Sarah was not a hero in the traditional sense. She was a victim who, in her quest for justice, became a manipulator and a predator herself. But her actions had brought down powerful, corrupt men that the system itself had protected. She had been forced to become a monster to fight monsters, a tragic product of a world that had offered her no other path to be heard. The real lesson of Serafina Washington's life and death was a chilling one. Justice is not always clean, and righteousness is not always pure. In a broken system that refuses to protect its most vulnerable, the cycle of violence and revenge will continue to turn. The fire Sarah started had exposed a deep-seated rot, but Riley knew that unless the very foundation of that system was rebuilt somewhere else, another desperate soul was already gathering kindling. The circle would only be broken when the roots of injustice were finally, truly pulled from the ground.